Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion, the podcast about books, authors, their craft and more. My name is Edith, and joining me for this episode from across the pond is author Gail Priest. Hello Gail and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Hello, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and for our listeners, Gail contacted me via our website. Yes, indeed, some people do look at our website. Who would have thought? Usually the teacups corner is very, popular. Sometimes also the About Us, especially, I suppose, our CEO is usually more popular than we are. But anyway, Gail, it's lovely to have you on, and we are going to talk about your book Soul Dancing, which came out in May 2024. The idea for the book is indeed very interesting, and I will leave it to you to tell our listeners as much as you like about your book.
Okay. Well, Soul Dancing is women's fiction with a paranormal twist. There's also a romance involved, so it's really a cross-genre book. And 90-year-old Shirlene Foster is passing away, but she resists the light. She wakes up in the body of another woman. And it's very surprising because the other woman is young and she's about to give birth to a child. Shirlene's afraid no one will believe that she is in this woman's body, and she tries to hide her identity for a while. One of the other main characters is Cameron, and he is a young man who's vowed to raise his niece after his brother abandoned his pregnant girlfriend, Rain. And Rain is kind of challenging. She's got a lot of unresolved issues, addiction issues. She's very unpleasant and kind of uncouth. But after the baby arrives, she completely changes because Shirlene is in there, not Rain. And Cameron's so confused. He can't figure out, did motherhood change Rain? Is she completely different? Well, eventually, Cameron confronts Rain, and Shirlene admits that she has taken over Rain's body. And Shirlene is happy to have a second chance at motherhood and life, but she also has struggles. And she wants to take care of her aging husband, who's in hospice. She has a newborn, and she and Cameron are beginning to feel attracted to each other. So things become very complicated. And she also learns that this body may not be hers forever.
Yes, it's quite a lot in there in your summary, and let's get started at the beginning, because your character, Shirlene, or the whole idea for the book, you said it's a paranormal twist in there. Of course there is, like you told us now, and the romance as well. But the idea itself, where did it come from? Where did you find the idea for this book?
It really was a little miracle. I just came up with it. I don't have a specific reason or inspiration. I just started thinking about what would happen if an older woman was able to have a child again and needed to be in a younger woman's body. And then there would be a triangle between Shirlene, her husband, Stan, who she loves. They have a lot of difficulties that they haven't worked through in their marriage. They're a little enmeshed, which is part of why she resists the light, because she feels like he can't cope without her. She needs to take care of him. And then there's Cameron, the young Philadelphia school teacher in his late 20s, who has wanted a child, but his life hasn't worked out that way. So when his brother doesn't want this baby, Cameron steps up and says, I'll raise the baby. I thought, who would be her true soulmate, Stan or Cameron? And that's where I started from there. And the book was originally called Soulmates. But then as I wrote it, I discovered that you can have more than one soulmate.
I stopped you, or we didn't hear you. You were talking about Cameron. And how he copes with the fact that now he also has a second chance, or first chance?
Yes. Well, a second chance at love, because he wanted to marry a very dear friend of his, Amy, who becomes more important as the novel develops. But I was talking about the idea initially was that Charlene would have to figure out who her soulmate was. Was it Stan or was it Cameron? But as I got into writing the novel, it became apparent to me, and eventually apparent to Cameron and to Charlene, that you can love more than one person very deeply. And that becomes a part of the resolution for both of them. Because he loved Amy, and now he's confused because he loves Charlene. He doesn't understand how she can still love Stan and the child that she and Stan had, and still love Cameron and their baby together now that they're raising Arlene.
Yep.
So that's why the title changed, because I thought this isn't really about choosing.
Mm-hmm.
It's about embracing.
Mm-hmm.
And embracing the love that comes to you, embracing the second chances that can come, and being able to resolve your past, come to peace with your past, and then move forward. So eventually I decided on the title Soul Dancing. But I had a lot of titles in between, and my husband would say, "What's it called this week, Gail?"
And like I said before, you explained the idea and where you got the idea. About the characters, I found it fascinating that you chose a 90-year-old woman and also her husband. He's not a young one anymore. And then switching body, so to speak, her soul switches body, or her soul changes body. And she realizes she isn't going, like you said, she's not going into the light, but she's changed bodies, and right in the middle of giving birth. Good God, that must, I mean, the surprise. You describe it quite vividly in your book. Why the 90-year-old woman and this complete change? I mean, you said, okay, she has a second chance, but Charlene grew up in a different time.
Mm-hmm.
She had to deal with different issues, and now she has to cope with living not only in the body of a young woman, also being a mother again, which is on the one hand also a second chance for her, but everything else in between, she has to deal with a lot.
Mm-hmm. I do. I give my characters a lot to deal with.
Yes, indeed.
They really struggle. That's part of what I think is fun. Well, for me as a writer, but also for the reader, that the characters are going through situations under very unusual circumstances, that she's in someone else's body. She's got to get accustomed to that. Cameron's dealing with his brother's girlfriend, but now it's someone else, and he's starting to have feelings for her. There's a lot going on. Excuse me. A little bit of allergies here. I think that the age really came to me partly because I wanted Charlene and Stan to be toward the end of their life. Not in their 60s, not even in their 70s. I mean, that's so young anymore because of medicine and eating healthy, living healthy, staying active. There can be folks that are pretty healthy. So I wanted them to be at the end of their lives. Also, that they had gone through World War II. I wanted them to be the right age for that. And that they were young. Stan was a fighter pilot. Charlene was home waiting for him to come home. She loses another family member in Normandy. That history was really important to me. And so that's part of why Cameron is a high school history teacher, because he loves history.
Yep.
And that connects them. Connects him a lot to Stan. And I wanted them to become friends, even though Shirlene doesn't want them to. She thinks she needs to protect Stan, and tries to keep them apart. Cameron kind of forces himself on Stan. And at first, Stan is very gruff about it, but eventually he warms up because he really is a sweetheart inside. But that brings the two men together, that information about fighting in the war and Cameron teaching about the war to his students. He's fascinated by all that. And to be able to talk to someone who actually survived that is a thrill for Cam. So that was part of the age factor too.
Mm. There are two things that come to mind when you talk about the age factor and the past she Charlene and Stan had experienced. One is she's an old soul. There are people who are quite young and are old souls, come to think of it. And a second one is, you probably know the saying, youth is wasted on the young. Would you say that is fitting in this case?
I think it can be that way. But there are a lot of young people who live very fully and are very passionate about what they're doing and don't take things for granted.
Yeah.
As a teacher, I see that.
Yeah.
But there is a sense of maybe not totally appreciating what you have when you're young, and it becomes more precious as you age. I find that for myself. And I know that if I could do it over again, I would do some things differently. Certainly. I think almost everybody would. There are some lucky people that don't have any regrets and would do things exactly the same. But I think that's unusual.
But there's also another question. We said that Charlene died. She was already walking into the light, but she wasn't quite ready because of Stan. That also implies, okay, we're getting philosophical here. That also implies, on the other hand, that in that moment, Rain was dying in childbirth. Doesn't it?
Yes, it does. There was some heart event, and I don't want to give too much away, but Rain doesn't want to hold on for various reasons that you'll find out when you read it. She wants to let go.
Yeah.
And so the body's available and Charlene's body can't sustain her. She thinks she's going to go back to her old body, but it's cancer ridden and she's in hospice and her body cannot function to take care of her husband. So she has to go someplace. And this affords her the opportunity to take care of Stan at home, which is very valuable for her and for him, of course. Yeah.
Did you also think, because that came to mind when I read your book and about this body switch or soul switch? No, it's a body switch. You remember probably the film with Steve Martin and Lily Tomlin, where she...
I love that film.
Yeah. You know which one I mean. The one where...
I can't think of what it's...
I can't remember.
My husband and I were just talking about it the other day, that we want to rewatch it because it's so great.
Yeah.
We'll have to Google it, find out what it's called.
Yeah, where she's this heiress, this rich woman, and she's ill and she wants her brain conserved and this body of, I think, the groundkeeper's daughter or something like that. And a teeny tiny bit, I have to admit, it reminded me a little bit of that. But it's not even remotely close, but I had to think of it. Something like that happened where we were switching bodies and taking our experience with us. And like I said, youth is wasted on the young, but there's also another saying which might would be fitting for Charlene now that she's in a younger body. The past is another country. Like you said, she experienced a lot in the past, in her past, not in Rain's past. And that also makes up who she is, her personality. I mean, she now has the young body, but like we said, there is this old soul. She has a lot of experience, unlike Rain, and it does a lot to her as a person, of course, for her personality. And do you think that is also, I mean, you said so a little bit already, that's what Cameron finds attractive? Because there is this different level of communication he can have with Rain Charlene.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And he's attracted to Charlene's way of being. She's kind and she's well educated and has a music background and knows theater and has lived through a lot of history. And she's thoughtful and thankful. And these are things that poor Rain has not figured out for herself. She's had a very rough early life, has gotten involved with drugs, has lived on the street, gotten involved with Cameron's brother, Chase, who is a complete dysfunctional guy. So there's quite a transformation when Charlene takes over and she gets a chance to play her piano again and sing again. And it's thrilling for her to be able to do these things and swim. She loves to swim. She hasn't been able to swim in years, and her hands were all affected with arthritis, and now they're healthy and young, and they're larger hands too, because Rain is a larger, taller woman than Charlene was in Charlene's body. So she has more power on the piano because her fingers are stronger and larger. Yeah, there are a lot of adjustments.
And this idea of your book also gives the question of age gap relationship a different meaning, doesn't it?
It does, yes. And that's something that's always fascinated me. Yes.
What especially? What especially in these romances? Because I also find them interesting.
Yes. Well, my parents were 11 years apart, so maybe that affected me.
Mine are too.
Yeah. One of my best friend's husbands was 13 years older than her. Another friend's husband is about 10 years older. Yeah, it's something that I find interesting. Well, I really wanted to explore kind of the opposite, where the woman was older, because a lot of times we don't do that.
Yeah.
It's kind of frowned upon, and she's a cougar or something.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's the other way around, if the man is older, he's a great guy because he got this young woman and... Excuse me?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Come on. And we haven't... You mentioned it briefly in your summary, Charlene's second chance at motherhood. And the person who tries to guide her or make sure she... Well, he's not really guiding her. He's there, but he more or less says, not quite sure if it's your time yet. If you have to go back, if you have things you have to make right. It was my time, but it was not yours. It's her son Danny, who said, don't be sad because my time had come, but yours not at the moment. So losing a child, isn't that something what we would say is the most awful things?
It is definitely.
In life.
It is. It's the worst thing that can happen, I think. Yeah. So she and Stan have carried that, and they haven't really worked it through in their marriage, even though it happened 70 some years ago. I don't know the number. I don't have it in my head, but I did know event earlier when I was planning it all out. It's so painful, so painful. And she's so happy to see Danny, but she still feels responsible for Stan. So she's torn.
Yeah.
And she somewhat continues to feel torn between her past life and her present second chance life throughout the novel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Concept.
And also, like you said, there is this growing attraction between her and Cameron. And yet there is still her responsibility for her still husband.
And she loves him.
Yes, indeed. And how do you deal with that? I mean, it's an awful question, to be honest.
It is. It's a very tough question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I also found interesting in your book was the fact that, like we said, it's a twist, a touch of the paranormal, and the acceptance by the other characters that she is indeed not, the personality behind the body, meaning there is someone else in there.
Right.
Did you I mean, somehow I found it fascinating. On the other hand, I'm playing the devil's advocate here. Not meaning to offend, but do you think it was maybe a bit too fast in a way, or how people accepted the fact, especially Cameron and Stan? Because I'm wondering. I'm not meaning to be offensive. I'm just wondering.
Oh no, it's totally fine. So let's think about Stan first. When she comes into the hospital room, because he has indeed had a heart attack, another heart attack.
Yeah.
He hasn't even opened his eyes yet. She thinks he's gone. And he already senses it's her because her spirit's there. So when he opens his eyes and sees another body, she's kind of like, well, I know it's still you because I sensed it before I opened my eyes. So they are extremely connected, extremely attached. And part of their tragedy with their son attached them. Mm-hmm. So that's how I handled that situation. Now, Cameron really doesn't believe at first. He puts her through all these tests.
Yeah.
And he struggles with it because it seems so bizarre. But he for a young person in his late 20s, he kind of has an old soul. Oh. He's very sensitive and loves history. He's not someone who wants to just be in the now. He had a lot of responsibility in his family. So I feel like he kind of can wrap his brain around things that maybe some other 28-year-old couldn't. But he does really put her through her paces to prove that she's not Rain. And he already suspects that something's wrong because Rain is suddenly knowing things that Rain wouldn't know because it's a more educated person. She's behaving differently. She knows what to do with the baby, and Rain wanted nothing to do with the baby. There are all these indicators. Excuse me. So now Hattie, her best friend, that was really fascinating for me. Here's this 90-year-old woman who misses her best friend, who's lost her best friend. Is trying to help her best friend's husband, who is also a very dear friend of hers. And then suddenly this estranged relative shows up to take care of Stan, and she comes bustling over to the house, with her super energy that she still has. And she's like, who is this? What is going on?
Yeah.
So when Shirley finally decides to let her know, because she's really wanting to tell her that she's in there, she immediately says things that only Hattie would know.
Yeah.
Hattie's like, how do you know that? She's not unhappy. But Shirley is persistent and keeps mentioning things that only Hattie would know. And also there's that I really believe in that spiritual connection between people that love each other, any kind of love, siblings, a couple, a mother and a child, whatever, very dear friends. So Hattie is like, I didn't really think you were gone. Mm. And so she accepts what's going on after Shirley convinces her, knowing her birthmark, knowing the time that she cried, things like that.
What is it, do you think, that we need in this day and age for us, for the future generation, to be more self-aware or reflective of who they are and all the things around them, of not getting sucked into social media or, artificial intelligence and whatnot. What do we need?
Well, I would say a lot of art. I teach theater, and I've been an actor and a director. And there's a funny line from that play and also the movie called Prom, where the people that come to town to try to save the prom are all from theater backgrounds. Some of them are famous actors, television stars, whatever. And they say to the kids, after seeing the kids' behaviors and things, they say, well, where's your theater department? And they're like, well, we don't have one. And one of the older characters, who's a theater person, says, well, that would explain the lack of empathy. We really learn through literature and art and performance and music to empathize with other people. We see their life story as these characters, or in the ballet or in the opera, whatever it is. We see people struggling and we start to care about them. And we need more of that. And I find very much with my theater kids, I call them theater kids, even though they're in their early 20s, they are quite empathetic and caring and kind to other folks. The theater's always been a place where a kid that sort of stood out or didn't fit in or wasn't comfortable or was a little different, they could fit in with the theater gang. It's always been that way from my experience.
Yeah, I would agree.
We need more of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And maybe limiting the time, especially children spend on,
I
these
know.
devices.
It's horrible. Little ones, little 5-year-olds, and makes me crazy. You try to have a conversation with them and they're on this device, on an iPad or in a game, and they're still talking to you, but they're multitasking, but they're not really present.
Yeah, that's it exactly.
That's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I do remember a concert with Cyndi Lauper here in Vienna at the Opera House, of all places. It was the Jazz Fest Vienna. And there was this guy in the auditorium, and he was constantly, I don't know what he was doing, filming or taking pictures or whatever. And she saw that, and she said, please put away your device. I'm here right now. Have this experience right now. But yeah, he wouldn't let go. So, and I would agree. I mean, empathy, unlike what we had in the past, I mean, it's rare. And why is it rare? Because of this distraction, because people are brought up to be narcissists, only interested in themselves. And when it doesn't look good for the future, then, like you said, we need people who read, who have an interest in the arts, and that makes us who we are. That differentiates us from the animal kingdom.
Yes. And to create more of a sense of being willing to give someone else a chance.
Yeah.
That it's not all about you, the me, all the selfies. And they're not, I sound so judgmental, and I don't want to be, because I know so many young people who are absolutely wonderful.
Yes.
But I think as a society, we are not, just like Cyndi Lauper said to that man that was filming, you're not in the experience.
Yeah.
You want to document the experience because you were there.
Yeah.
Rather than being there.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with museums, isn't it? People stand in front of a painting, taking a selfie, and are not looking at the painting.
Right.
Yeah. And maybe that's also what attracts, again, Cameron so much to Shirley, because different generation, looking different at things, experiencing things differently, she's able to do it again. Like you said, a second chance in everything.
Everything. A career that she couldn't have because she was a woman.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, isn't that something we all sometimes think about? If I could do it again, what would I do differently? I mean, was that also motivation for writing the book that way? What would I do if I had a second chance? This question or this idea?
Yes, I think that most artists are really exploring themselves when they're creating, whether it's a painting or a sculpture or a play or a film script or a song or being on stage. I mean, I really do that when I'm working with my actors, that they are the person in the space. They're taking on the clothing, like the costume. They're taking on the history, the given circumstances of that character, but they're still themselves.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're running into an unhealthy way of being that you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
And, we don't want Hannibal Lecter to go home. We need him to be able to take off that character.
Yes, please.
And be okay in the world. So I very much encourage them to use what they have as a person to relate to the character and bring themselves into the role. Uta Hagen, who is a famous actor and teacher, said, and I got to make sure I get it right, you don't want to lose yourself in the character. You want to find yourself in the character. Yeah. I don't know what you asked me, but I went on that tangent.
No, it's quite interesting. Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, come to think of it. It took me a very long time to realize what, for example, saying like the past is another country means. I mean, I know what it means, but to feel it, if you know what I mean, to get it, so to speak. Understanding is one thing, but getting it is a completely different thing. And I wanted to ask you, coming back to the writing of your book, was there a character you find especially hard to write? Whose voice wasn't that loud, unlike the others, for example?
I was really lucky with this group. I think he really, my characters talk to me. Most authors say that. It's not unusual. We're not really schizophrenic. Chase, Cameron's brother, was more of a challenge to hear because of his struggles and his addictions. So, but man, when he burst into that beach house, I saw and heard exactly what he was going to do. So nobody really gave me a hard time. They were very active, very, very talky.
Yeah.
And I see it like a film when I'm writing. Yeah, it's very visual for me.
Yeah.
So I have to know exactly how the house is laid out. I mean, I make floor plans of like the beach house and Cam's apartment in Philadelphia and Charlene and Stan's house in Haddon Heights, New Jersey. Yes, I have it all mapped out. I spend time with drawing and graph and paper and yeah.
So that would also suggest that you are quite a planner. Or somewhere in the middle.
It's interesting. I feel that I'm a pantser. If you want to explain to folks what we mean by that, some authors outline everything, they plan everything, they have character descriptions and everything done before they start writing it all. And that's the only way they can do it.
Yeah.
Others are pantsers, where they don't do any preliminary stuff. They just start writing. Whatever scene pops into their head, they start writing. And I am that way when it comes to actually starting.
Oh.
But once I am in the middle of something, I will step back and go, oh, you know what? I need to know the layout of those rooms in order to have it make sense and make sure I'm not having someone do something that wouldn't make sense to the reader.
Yeah.
So I will end up doing some drawings, doing a mind map so I can kind of connect the dots. And sometimes I'll go to note cards and I'll write down scenes on each note card so I can spread them out. When I did the Annie Knoll trilogy, I had to keep, 60 years of a woman's life straight. It was a lot of time. That's why this book is like 3 or 4 months, because I didn't want to go through that again. But when I got to the third book, when Annie's a grandmother and you have all of these character arcs for each couple, you have her arc with Packard, you have her past arc with Drew, because he's in the third book, her ex-husband. You have Gemma and Atticus. You have Breezy and Easton. How do I keep this straight? So I was very fortunate to take an afternoon workshop with someone who suggested from the South Jersey Writers Group, instead of looking at the entire arc of the novel, look at the character arcs, each one. So my note cards or sticky cards became organized by the character and, the pairs, and not the whole book. So I could see the whole story for Gemma, the whole story for Breezy, the whole story for Annie and their men. And then I ended up moving them all around to figure out what scene goes where in the novel. There was no other way to do it. However, when I actually wrote, I was writing by the seat of my pants. Whatever scene popped into my head, I wrote it. And I would put it aside. And that's why toward the end, I had to really get organized in order to put it in some kind of order that would make sense.
So did you plan this trilogy as a trilogy from the beginning? Or did it turn out in the end that way?
Soul Dancing, you're asking about.
No, about the other one you just described.
Annie Knoll trilogy?
Yeah.
No, I had no idea where I was going.
Okay.
No, I really, really didn't know. In fact, I had the first 2 stories were one big, gigantic book to begin with.
Okay.
And I worked with an editor who said, it's way too long. You've got cut. And I went, well, wait a minute. What if we made it 2 books?
Yeah.
Had Annie's story and then kind of Nate's story, her son, be the second book, although Annie's still major, protagonist.
Yeah.
But it's her relationship with her son and her son's wife. And how does that all work out? So that's what I did. I had to figure out, where's the stopping point?
Yeah.
I had to have some kind of conclusion for Annie.
Yeah.
So a conclusion for her romantically that came in the second half, I moved it up. So they got together sooner. But I don't want to say who or what. I don't like to ruin it.
No.
Then, we get into Nate and his struggles and June's struggles. And that ends with her finally coming to terms with various things that June needs to work on, and Nate accepting her as she is. And then the third book is 20 years later, when Nate and June's daughters are in their 20s and they're world-class cyclists heading for the 2016 Olympics. Yeah.
I suppose it's a little bit easier when you write the romance, isn't it? I mean, you know more or less how it ends, the happy end. If you're interested in a happy end, unlike a crime fiction, because I suppose not knowing exactly how it was done is maybe a bit of a pickle for an author. But for, like you said, for a romance author, there are scenes popping in your head. You know where you want them to end up. But everything in between, is rather open.
Yes, it's flexible.
Yeah.
It kind of flows back and forth.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing with soul dancing, without any spoilers here, the book ended midway. That was the end of the book. The big crisis at the midway point was the end. And I had a whole book. And I thought, it can't end this way. This is not a happy ending. And even though I'm writing women's fiction and there's romance involved, I still would like a positive ending. And a romance really needs it. So my husband read it. He loved how it ended. But then I talked to a very dear friend of mine who is an author of many, many books and also the publisher for the Annie Kroll trilogy. And she said, oh, you can't possibly end it there. People will throw the book across the room. And I agreed. So I had to write the second half. But it all worked out. It worked out really beautifully. I'm very happy that, the shocking revelation midpoint is not the end of the novel. Just another twist.
Yeah. May I ask, you mentioned again women's fiction.
Mm-hmm.
How is women's fiction defined? Because, I always find it hard to accept when people say, that's book for women, and I always wonder, and what about the rest? If that's for women, what about the rest? Because maybe, just maybe, I don't just want to read women's fiction. Don't get me wrong. Because
No, I understand.
if you know what I mean, because a few years ago there was in a shop in Austria, there was this display, and it was called films for women, and one woman had the guts to rearrange the shelf, and she put all the films in she really liked, like action and horror and whatnot. And I thought, yes, indeed, thank you very much, because films for women is not only romance, and you need a tissue to get through the whole film. There is also Alien. There is probably, I don't know, a zombie movie or what else. I don't know. Action, Die Hard.
Right. Yes.
So my question is, how is women's fiction defined, and
Who's it for?
yes.
Well, it's really for everybody. And luckily I have men read my books, and I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So that's good. I like that. And I hesitate to say it's women's fiction when a man's, come up to my booth at a book event, because I don't want to have him go, oh God. But, I belong to the Women's Fiction Writers Association, and we struggle with this all the time. We don't really like the title. It kind of pigeonholes us. But we have come up with kind of a definition. The protagonist, male or female, goes on an emotional journey, and they have a catharsis. So it can have romance, obviously. It can have mystery. It could be suspenseful. He or she could be a private eye. But they go through a journey emotionally. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. So it can be a man or a woman character, because Cameron has to sort through all kinds of unresolved stuff. I put that poor kid through his paces. I pulled a rug out from under him so many times. So he very much goes through a journey, just like Charlene does. It's not just her journey. He has one too. And somehow they resolve it by the end. They've become different, more aware, more solid on the ground, knowing who they are and what they want.
Okay.
You look like you have another question.
Yes. I may have to play the devil's advocate again.
Okay, do it.
Because you just said it's about an emotional journey. For me, again, I'm contrary. this means women are emotional, men are not.
Mm.
So men's fiction isn't about the emotional journey then.
Well, you're right. It shouldn't be that way. And that's why the Women's Fiction Association struggles.
Yeah.
You know, that we have thousands of members all over the world. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what are we doing? What is this?
Yeah.
Why is it called this? You know,
But why even
you know,
put a label on it?
I know. Well, we don't like the label, but right now we have to live with it. So we try to make it work. But a really good, for me, a really strong male character, even if he's fighting aliens, if he has more of a backstory as to why he's the way he is and he needs to change, wants to change, doesn't want to change, but then he discovers he'd be better off if he changes. He goes through an emotional journey and he's someone else later. Like my husband and I have been watching Elementary. It's that TV show with Johnny Lee Miller play Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
And Lucy Liu is
Dr. Watson.
Yeah. We love it. We've been binging on it. And he grows so much. He doesn't stay the same. This particular journey for Sherlock is a very emotional one. He has such unresolved issues with the woman that he loves, that he thinks dies, with his father, with his brother, really resents them both. And Dr. Watson, she changes too, but she really helps him to change because he starts to open up. And he's still who he is. He's still not great with social skills, which is kind of amusing at times. And he feels that he's the most brilliant person around and he can solve things before anybody else. And when he can't, he goes into deep depression. But as a person, he is evolving through this series, and it's fascinating to watch him. And I love the choices that they've made.
Oh, okay. Have you ever watched Agatha Christie's Poirot with David Suchet?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I have.
Yeah, you should, because it's very close to the books, and like David Suchet himself says, Poirot is a person who lives from the neck upwards. And there is this one feature-length episode, Death on the Orient Express, and it shows us an interesting side of Poirot where he struggles with what to do in the end, because he knows who did it, but how shall he end it? Because what shall he do? How shall he make sure justice is done? Is justice, or has justice been done already? He struggles because his idea of justice is a different one. And it shows a side of him that is quite fascinating and interesting. And it's, like he said, his growth is not really there in the show, because it's not so much about his growth, but, Agatha Christie, it was whodunit. And he's not a very, in the end, you could say he's not a very nice person. Like Sherlock Holmes wasn't a really nice person in the books. And it's not about that. We as readers usually don't care that he's not a nice person. All we care about is that he gets the bad guy. He solves the mystery. But this is a fascinating, I would say, character study of Poirot in this film. Maybe even more so than in the book itself. Yeah, and like you said, an emotional journey. I do hope that the characters does have an emotional journey, whether it's women's fiction or fiction for men. It should be there in every book. This growth, this change, this how we learn about ourselves and others, and how do we cope with what we encounter.
Right.
Not
What
just
choices do we
women's.
make?
Yes, not just women's fiction. I mean, for me, it should be it should be always there. Otherwise,
Mhm.
you know,
I agree. Yes,
what would be the point of the character?
absolutely.
Because otherwise, you can shoot him or her and say, "Okay, I don't mind.
Right.
Let's get."
Well, that's the distinction for me when I'm reading a book or watching a movie or getting involved with a TV series. If I don't care about the characters, I don't continue
Hmm,
because I have to care about them.
hmm,
Not everybody. There are
yeah,
certainly going to be characters you don't like and that you hope, have a come to justice.
yeah,
But the main characters who are dealing with the problem, um, they can be flawed
yeah,
as we should be. We all are,
yeah.
but there has to be some redeeming feature.
Hmm,
And I talk to my actors about this too, because if they play a character they don't like, because the character does evil things or unkind things, you can't sit in judgment of that. You have to find a way to justify what you're doing as the character, because otherwise it won't come across as real and true. And I can go back to Hannibal Lecter, for example. He's he's so brilliant and fascinating and intriguing. Even though he does these terrible things, there's something appealing about him. And you want him to stop, you want him to be captured, you want him to pay for
yeah,
the price, but you don't just hate him. There's something seductive about him. That's a
yeah,
really well-written character.
yeah, absolutely. Although he doesn't have redeeming qualities,
Mm-mm.
does he?
No,
Not
he
at
really
all.
does.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
But I agree with you. There are books with these kinds of characters, psychopaths, people without any
Mhm.
empathy, and yet we find them incredibly fascinating.
Mhm.
Makes you wonder what it says about us then.
Mm.
Hmm. But you know what I mean. We can't put the book down, or this we can't forget about the story because they were, like you said, so appealing
Mhm.
in their badness.
Mm.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Not just those who are on a journey, who change, who learn, who grow, but also people like you said, Hannibal Lecter. There's something
Mhm.
about him that draws us in, and we want to know more. We want to read more. We want him. We want the authorities to catch him. But on the other
Mhm.
hand, we still want to read about his deeds and misdeeds. More like,
Right, right.
yeah, well,
True.
yeah, absolutely. Uh, Gail, uh, question I often ask my authors, so most of the time, what would be your advice to any other author out there?
Hmm. I have several things I would advise them on. Trusting themselves and letting their own voice guide them. And don't listen to what's in the market or what people are buying now or mm, just follow your own instinct and trust your own voice. That's huge. I would say it's also helpful if you make a decision as to whether you're going to write for the pleasure of it or you want to market. Do you want other people to read your book? Do you want your book out in the world or your short stories or whatever it is you're doing? Because you have to understand that it's a business if you're going to go in that other direction. You have to work really, really hard. And a lot of times, because we can be very right brain, um, it's hard for creative people to handle the marketing part and publicity and negotiating and working out contracts. And it's a lot. It's exhausting. But I don't want to discourage, because it's worth it if it's what you really want. You just have to know you're going into that. And you're going to have to wear another hat. You're going to take off the creative hat and put on this marketing hat and go about it as a business.
Well, since book writing is also business for most of the authors, may I also ask about your plans for the near future? What can your readers expect next from you?
My next novel is set in Cape May Point, New Jersey. I'm on the beach again. I like to be around water myself, so I write a lot about water and characters that live near the water, work on the water. Cape May Point is a lovely little town at the very southern tip of New Jersey. And I have 2 plots going. The one I feel with the new year that I'm going to concentrate on is about a family of 3 women. The grandmother is a wild bird rehabilitator, because Cape May Point is a hot spot for bird migration. People come from all over the world to bird in Cape May Point. And so anyway, Rose is estranged from her daughter, Willet, who she named after her favorite shorebird. And she has a granddaughter. Willet has a daughter, Hope, because Willet's favorite poem is the Emily Dickinson poem about birds of hope. Now I'm forgetting how it goes. You can edit this part out. Hope is a thing with feathers. There you go. Little moment of delay. Yes. So they have a lot to resolve, because Willet left and sort of made a life out in the business world, and her daughter wants to be out in Cape May Point, with her grandmother. And so they have a lot of complications. And then Hope's father is not in the picture because he doesn't know he had a daughter. It was hidden from him. So he's going to show up. And there'll be a dual timeline from when Willet and Martin are young and falling in love. And he's an intern for her mom at the Wild Bird Rehabilitation Center. And then 20 years later, when they have to come back together and figure out what the heck happened and why she kept her daughter a secret from him. Yeah.
Oh.
Mm.
I sense there is a little bit of an age gap there as well.
No, they're pretty much the same age.
Okay.
Yes,
Gail, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Well, I hope that they check out my website, gailpriest.com. It's very easy. And I have 6 books, so there's a lot to choose from, but Soul Dancing is a standalone, and it's gotten a lot of support and feedback, positive feedback. It's won 10 awards, including Book of the Year, 2024 Book of the Year from the American Writing Awards, which was thrilling. So go for that. And then you've got the Annie Kroll trilogy if you want to do a trilogy, and it all takes place on the Eastern Shore at the Chesapeake Bay. Beautiful area because the setting is so important to the characters and their healing. I have a collection of short stories called Eastern Shore Shorts. Every story takes place in a different town on the Eastern Shore. And then they come together in the last story. The characters are connected. A Collingswood Christmas was my definite romance. It's a novelette I put out for the holidays this year. It takes place in my hometown of Collingswood, New Jersey. Yeah, it's sweet. Yes, I guess that's all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes. So have at it. Have fun. And I'll be working on the next one.
Yes, dear listeners, you heard her. And I have to agree. Also, Soul Dancing is a fascinating book with a lot to think about, philosophical question, romance, the paranormal, everything you can wish for. Absolutely.
Good.
Gail, thank you so much for joining me. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Well, I had a great time.
Please don't go away. I will join you shortly in the green room.
Okay. Thank you.
Dear listeners, I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as my guest and I did. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope we'll meet again for another episode. Until next time.